After my husband died, his mother tried to take everything from me except our daughter. My lawyer practically begged me to fight back. I didn't fight, at least not the way everyone expected, and this is why. Welcome to my new story. 11 days after I buried Joel, Carla Frettel stood right in the middle of my kitchen like she already owned the air inside it. She raised her arms slowly, dramatically, first pointing up at the ceiling with that faint water stain we'd always meant to fix, then sweeping across the walls where Tessa's crayon drawings were taped up in a colorful, chaotic row, and finally jabbing downward at the laminate floor we'd installed together one sweaty Saturday, laughing because I kept stepping in the fresh glue and tracking it everywhere. "All of this is mine now," she announced, her voice calm and businesslike. "The house, Joel's law firm, every single bank account, every last dollar. Everything, Miriam. Everything except your little 4-year-old daughter. Because," and here she paused, tilting her head as if choosing from a menu, "I didn't sign up for someone else's child." I stood frozen by the sink, still holding the damp dishcloth I'd been using to wipe sticky oatmeal off the table after Tessa's breakfast. My coffee had gone stone cold in the mug. I didn't say a word. I just stared at her, at the perfect silver waves in her hair, at the heavy sapphire ring she twisted on her finger when she was making a point, at the crisp gray blazer she'd clearly chosen for this meeting. Behind her, Spencer hovered awkwardly with a metal tape measure in his hand, the kind that snaps back with a loud click. He'd already wandered off to the guest bedroom and started measuring the closet like he was mentally hanging his clothes there. Click, snap, click. "My name is Miriam Frettel. I'm 31 years old. Until very recently, I lived in Covington, Kentucky, that quiet little river town sitting right across the Ohio from Cincinnati. The sort of place where people still wave from their driveways, where everyone knows your business and exactly how much you paid for your house down to the last $1,000. I married Joel when I was 24. He was a personal injury attorney who built his firm from nothing. Well, almost nothing. His mother's $185,000 loan and about 6,000 hours of his own blood, sweat, and late-night coffee. He began in a cramped rented office above a flooring store on Madison Avenue. Every client consultation was accompanied by the muffled sound of someone downstairs choosing laminate samples. Thump, rustle, thump. Within 5 years, he'd moved to a real suite, hired a handful of people, and was billing more than $600,000 a year. Frettel and Associates. His name etched on the glass door. His mother never let a single soul forget who had paid for that door to exist. Joel died on a Thursday evening, March 6th. Cardiac arrest. They found him slumped at his desk, fingers still curled around his favorite coffee mug, the blue one with the tiny chip on the rim that he refused to throw away. He was only 36. I was giving Tessa her bath when the phone rang. Soap bubbles clung to my sleeves as I drove across town with wet arms and dish soap still under my fingernails. When I got there, the paramedics had already stopped compressions. The funeral was the following Wednesday. Carla showed up in enormous black Chanel sunglasses, indoors, the kind that cover half your face so no one can tell whether the tears are real or just part of the performance. Spencer stood next to her, shifting from foot to foot like a teenager waiting outside the principal's office. He was 29, had never kept a job longer than 5 months, and lived rent-free in Carla's guest house in Burlington. His daily routine mostly involved sleeping until noon and buying random gadgets online with her credit card. You have to understand something important about Carla. She wasn't a helpless, sweet old widow. After divorcing Joel's father, she single-handedly built 4 dry cleaning stores across northern Kentucky. She knew margins. She knew cash flow. Or at least she believed she did. In the dry cleaning business, the equation is brutally simple. Dirty clothes come in, clean clothes go out. money lands in the register. She tried to apply exactly the same straightforward logic to a law firm she had never once worked in professionally. To her, Joel's practice was just another storefront. Only instead of starching shirts, you pressed personal injury claims. And instead of quarters dropping into machines, you had $600,000 rolling through the books every year. From the very first Thanksgiving she hosted us at her house, she treated me like a temporary placeholder, someone Joel would eventually tire of and upgrade from. I'd been a legal secretary when we met. No glamour, no family money, no country club connections. One holiday, while Joel and I were still happily married and standing right beside her, she introduced me to her bridge club friends as Joel's first wife. The words hung in the air like smoke. So when she marched into my kitchen that Monday morning, 11 days after we'd lowered Joel into the ground, I shouldn't have been surprised. But grief does strange things to your nervous system. It slows your reflexes. You absorb blows you would normally dodge from a mile away. Carla had dressed for the occasion. Tailored gray blazer, pearl earrings, low heels that clicked authoritatively on the floor. Spencer trailed behind her carrying that ridiculous tape measure like it was a blueprint. While she stood at the kitchen island laying out her reclamation plan in calm, measured sentences, I could hear him in the hallway. Click, snap, measuring closet space for clothes he didn't even own. I stood there thinking, what on earth does this man have that would even fill half a closet? His most prized possession was an oversized gaming chair with built-in speakers. Carla delivered her position like she was giving a quarterly board update. The firm existed because of her seed money. The down payment on our house, $30,000 7 years earlier, had been her gift, and she reminded us of it at every family gathering without fail. In her mind, she was the silent partner in every asset Joel had ever acquired. Now that he was gone, she wanted her capital returned. With interest, naturally. The one thing she explicitly did not want was Tessa. She stated it so flatly, so offhandedly, like turning down a second helping of potatoes. No thank you. Not the child. Just the assets, please. I gripped my cold coffee mug so tightly I thought it might crack. I said nothing. Not because I was agreeing. My mind simply refused to compute losing my husband, and then being systematically robbed in the space of a single month. 2 days later, a certified letter arrived in the mailbox. Axel Mendler, attorney at law. Carla had formally contested Joel's will and filed a creditor's claim against the estate for the full $185,000 loan plus interest. This was no longer angry kitchen table talk. This was war, legal, documented, and launched before the funeral flowers had even begun to wilt on the grave. Before we go any further, if you're still with me, please subscribe and drop a comment. Tell me where in the world you're watching from and what time it is there right now. I read every single one. They mean more than you know. Thank you for being here. Okay. Where were we? Right. Carla had escalated from verbal threats in my kitchen to formal court filings in under 48 hours. Meanwhile, I was still sleeping on sheets that carried the faint trace of Joel's cologne, staring at the ceiling at 3 a.m., trying to find the words to explain to a 4-year-old why Daddy wasn't coming through the door anymore with his briefcase and that tired but happy smile. Axel Mendler was no rookie. He built the will contest on reasonably solid ground, arguing that Carla's original loan constituted an equity investment rather than a simple family favor, therefore entitling her to a share of the firm's value. He filed a parallel creditor's claim for the loan principal and accrued interest. 2 simultaneous legal fronts. Carla was paying him $350 an hour and expected swift victory. But waiting for the slow grind of probate court wasn't her style. She decided to take possession immediately. The very next week she drove to Fredel and Associates on Scott Boulevard, second-floor suite, nice view of the river on clear days, walked straight in, and began introducing herself to the tiny staff as the new acting overseer. 4 employees total, 2 paralegals, 1 fresh out of school, 1 a veteran, a receptionist who doubled as office manager, and Gail Horvath, the bookkeeper who had been with Joel since the beginning, 6 loyal years. Carla announced that major changes were coming and instructed Gail to print revenue reports for the past 3 fiscal years. Gail did. Carla scanned the top-line number, $620,000 in annual billings, gave a satisfied nod as if everything she'd ever suspected had just been proven, and walked out. She never requested expense breakdowns, never inquired about outstanding debts or vendor balances, never cracked open a single liabilities folder. She looked at gross revenue and decided she was walking into a gold mine. It was the financial equivalent of checking only your paycheck deposits and declaring yourself a millionaire. Then she moved on to the clients. One by one, she dug up phone numbers from the contact list and called them personally, introducing herself as the family member now overseeing the transition of the practice. She held no law license. She had 0 legal authority. She didn't even grasp what most of the open cases involved. But to Carla, unshakable confidence was the same thing as competence, and she had confidence in industrial quantities. Most of Joel's clients were understandably horrified to receive a call from their deceased attorney's mother claiming control. Within days, the majority transferred their files to other firms. Carla was, quite literally, destroying the very revenue engine she was fighting in court to possess. Imagine setting your own house ablaze while simultaneously suing the insurance company over its market value. Then came Spencer. About a week after Carla's office takeover, he rolled up to my house in her Buick Enclave. 2 duffel bags, a PlayStation console, and an economy-size bag of barbecue chips. He marched to the front door and declared, "Mom said this place is basically ours now, so I'm moving into the guest room. No bed sheets, no pillow, no change of clothes suitable for anything resembling work, just gaming gear and snacks." I told him to leave, calmly at first, then less calmly. He refused, plopped on the couch, and started unpacking controllers. I called Covington Police. 2 officers arrived within 15 minutes, checked the deed, still in Joel's name, confirmed I was the surviving spouse with possession rights, and politely but firmly escorted Spencer back to the Buick. He left the open bag of chips sitting on my porch like a parting gift. I threw them in the trash. That same night, Carla called. Her voice climbed to a frequency I didn't know human vocal cords could reach, somewhere between a smoke detector and a soprano rehearsing a tragic aria. She screamed that I was heartless, cruel, that Joel would be ashamed of me for throwing his only brother out onto the street like trash. I reminded her, quietly, that Spencer already had a fully furnished bedroom in her own guest house. She hung up mid-sentence. At the same time, my own support circle was starting to fracture. My mom drove up from Lexington that weekend, sat down at the very same kitchen table where Carla had staged her hostile takeover, looked me in the eye and said, "Honey, you cannot just let this woman walk all over you. You have got to fight." My best friend Shannon texted or called every single night. "Get a lawyer. Not just any lawyer. Get a shark. Do not let her steamroll you and Tessa." So I finally listened. I hired L.R.A. Schmidt, a recommendation from one of Joel's old colleagues. Mid-50s, German-American, silver streaks in her dark hair, the kind of quiet, surgical calm that makes you believe, even for a moment, that the world might still make sense. 20 years specializing in estate and probate disputes. She reviewed Carla's filings in under 40 minutes and delivered her verdict. "This is beatable. There's no signed partnership agreement. No formal equity terms. Nothing in writing that gives her ownership. The will is clean, properly witnessed and executed. We fight this, we win, and Carla goes home with nothing except an expensive education in basic contract law. I asked for a few days to think it over. That night, after I'd tucked Tessa in and read her the Flutterbee story for the third time, I drove to Joel's office. It was almost 9 o'clock. The building was pitch dark except for the faint green glow of exit signs in the stairwell. I let myself into his private office with the spare key I'd carried on my ring since the day he moved in. I sat down at his desk. The air still carried traces of him. Fresh coffee, that sandalwood aftershave he'd worn since college, a hint of the leather from his chair. I pulled open the bottom drawer, the deep one he always kept locked when clients were around. Behind a stack of closed case files, I found a plain manila envelope, sealed. On the front, in his neat handwriting, not Miriam Frettle, just Miriam, with a tiny hand-drawn heart beside it, the way we used to pass notes in study hall. I opened it with shaking fingers. I read every word. Then I sat motionless in the dark office for almost an hour. No tears, no deep breaths, just perfect, crystalline clarity. For the first time since March 6th, my head was quiet. The next morning I called LRA. My voice sounded different even to me. Steady, low, like a switch had flipped somewhere behind my eyes. LRA, I've changed my mind. I don't want to fight anymore. I want to give Carla everything she's demanding. Everything. There was a long silence. 10 full seconds. For someone who charges by the hour, that's practically a cardiac event. 8 months before his death, Joel had been diagnosed with a serious cardiac condition. He'd started noticing shortness of breath on simple stairs, intermittent chest pressure, a bone-deep fatigue that no amount of sleep could touch. He finally saw a specialist across the river in Cincinnati. The news was grim, progressive, requiring lifelong management, delivered with that careful, apologetic tone doctors use when they wish they had better answers. Joel never told his mother, never told Spencer, never told anyone except, eventually, me. He was a personal injury lawyer. His entire career had been spent watching ordinary lives implode because someone failed to plan ahead, cut corners, assumed tomorrow would take care of itself. He refused to let that happen to Tessa and me. So during those final 8 months, while he still went to the office every day, still wore his best suits, still regaled his mother with exaggerated stories of big settlements over Sunday roast, he quietly, methodically put every piece in place. The envelope contained 3 items. First, a handwritten letter dated 5 weeks before he died. Not a legal document, not instructions, just a letter from my husband to me. He wrote about Tessa's latest obsession, calling butterflies flutterbees, and how he loved it too much to ever correct her. He described the exact way morning sunlight poured through our kitchen window, across the sink, and lit up the counter in a soft golden pool that made even spilled cereal look beautiful. He remembered the day we met. Me, 22, working the front desk at Bernstein and Kellogg. Him, a junior associate who asked me to lunch 4 separate times before I finally said yes because I had this silly, ironclad rule about never dating lawyers. Clearly, that rule didn't survive contact with him. The closing line wasn't dramatic. It was simple trust. Don't let her take what matters. She can have the rest. Second, updated beneficiary designation forms. Joel had taken out a $875,000 term life insurance policy at age 30 when the bank required it as collateral for his original business loan. He'd quietly changed the beneficiary to me, Miriam Frettle, sole and irrevocable. No new medical exam needed. Just a 1-page form and a signature. That payout would go directly to me upon his death, outside the estate, outside probate, untouchable by Carla or any creditor. He'd done exactly the same with his retirement accounts. Approximately $152,000 in his 401k, and approximately $58,000 in his Roth IRA, both beneficiary designations updated to me alone. Another $210,000 safe from probate. This isn't some clever loophole. It's how life insurance and retirement accounts function in every state in America. Financial planners remind clients annually to check beneficiaries. Most people procrastinate. Joel didn't. Third, a detailed, handwritten financial autopsy of Fredel and Associates. Every debt, every ticking liability laid out in his precise lawyer's script. Yes, the firm generated $620,000 in annual revenue, the number he'd casually mentioned at family dinners, the number Carla had memorized like gospel. But revenue is not profit. Behind the curtain, $15,000 in accumulated vendor and overhead debts, a $180,000 malpractice settlement already negotiated and pending. Joel had agreed to it months earlier. $47,000 in unpaid payroll taxes. The IRS treats those as personal trust fund liabilities. They come after you personally. 34 months remaining on the office lease at $4,200 per month. Another $142,800 in unavoidable rent. Our house appraised around $385,000, but encumbered by a $220,000 home equity line he'd drawn to keep the firm afloat, plus the remaining $160,000 mortgage. Total debt on the property roughly $360,000 after closing costs and fees. Selling would net zero, possibly negative. And Carla's cherished $185,000 loan? Unsecured debt. Dead last in line behind the IRS, the malpractice plaintiff, every vendor with a contract, the landlord. By the time priority creditors were satisfied, nothing would remain. I sat in that dark office and ran the numbers on the back of an old grocery receipt. My side of the ledger. $1,085,000 in clean, tax-advantaged, non-probate assets already legally mine. Carla's side. Approximately negative $520,000 once all liabilities were tallied against realizable value. The next day, Gail Horvath called me. Shaken. Carla had fired her the previous week with no notice and no severance after 6 years of flawless service. Gail confirmed every figure in Joel's summary. When Carla had stormed the office, she demanded revenue reports only. Gail printed them. Carla studied the income line, nodded approvingly, and left without ever opening the expenses binder or the liabilities folder. One column on one spreadsheet, and she thought she'd inherited El Dorado. I phoned LRA the following morning. Don't fight. Extend an offer. She can have everything in the estate, the house, the firm, every account tied to Joel's name. All I want in return is sole legal and physical custody of Tessa. No visitation rights for Carla. None. LRA told me to come straight to her office. I brought the envelope. I spread the contents across her desk. The letter, the beneficiary forms, the financial summary, my scribbled grocery receipt math. She read slowly, checked figures twice, reviewed the insurance confirmations and retirement designations. Then LRA Schmidt, a woman who had spent 2 decades in the trenches of estate litigation without ever losing her composure, leaned back in her chair, took off her glasses, and started laughing. Not a polite chuckle. Real, unstoppable laughter that made her eyes water. When she could speak again, she looked at me and said 2 words. Joel was brilliant. Then she picked up her pen and began drafting the settlement proposal. The offer went to Axel the following week. On paper, it looked like total capitulation. Miriam Fredel waives and relinquishes any and all claims to estate assets. including but not limited to Frettel and Associates, the residential property at address, and every associated financial account. In exchange, Carla Friedel drops her will contest permanently and relinquishes any claim to custody or visitation with Tessa Friedel. Miriam receives full sole custody. That's it. Take the empire. Leave the child. Axel smelled a trap. When your opponent hands you everything on a silver platter without resistance, any competent attorney starts looking for hidden explosives. He called LRA back and demanded 2 weeks for a full forensic audit of the firm's books. "Just 2 weeks," he said. "Let me go through everything properly." Carla refused. From her perspective, the logic was airtight. For 7 years she had watched me. Quiet, polite, never raising my voice at holiday dinners no matter how many times she called me Joel's first wife, or asked, with that pitying smile, when I planned to do something with my life. In her eyes, I was finally behaving exactly as expected, folding like a cheap lawn chair. And when your opponent is trying to walk away from a winning hand, you don't pause to reshuffle the deck. You rake in the chips. Axel fought back hard. He drafted a formal 2-page single-spaced advisory letter warning that due diligence on the firm's financial position remained incomplete and strongly recommending she delay acceptance until a comprehensive audit could be performed. This is standard practice. Lawyers do it to protect themselves from malpractice claims later. Axel was protecting himself beautifully. Carla read the letter, signed the waiver at the bottom, acknowledging she was proceeding against her own attorney's explicit advice, and instructed him to schedule the closing. One last thing. Axel asked LRA directly on a recorded call, "Are there any non-estate assets we should know about? Life insurance policies, retirement accounts with named beneficiaries?" LRA answered precisely as ethics and law required. Non-estate assets fall outside the scope of this probate settlement. My client is under no legal duty to disclose them. Carla heard that through Axel and brushed it aside instantly. Joel had never once mentioned life insurance to her. Why would he? He was 36, healthy. Young men don't think about death. Except Joel had, because a bank required the policy 6 years earlier as loan collateral. And Joel was the kind of man who paid premiums on time even when cash flow was tight and the world was falling apart. While Carla was busy signing waivers and dismissing red flags, I moved quietly. The insurance company processed the claim in just under 3 weeks. $875,000 landed directly in my new personal checking account at a credit union in Florence, Kentucky, an account I'd opened specifically for this purpose, with zero connection to Joel's old accounts or the estate. I initiated rollovers on the retirement funds too, $152,000 from the 401k and $58,000 from the Roth IRA, both now solely in my name. I began moving out of the house in small, inconspicuous loads. Tessa's clothes and favorite stuffed animals first, then my books, important documents, our photo albums. I found a modest 2-bedroom apartment in Florence, 20 minutes south. Clean complex, excellent school district. First and last month's rent, $1,800. I paid it from my new account without hesitation. Meanwhile, Spencer was living his best life, or trying to. Carla had sent him to the firm to manage operations during the transition. Mostly that meant he sat in Joel's old chair, spun in circles, tried and failed to figure out the multi-line phone system, and asked one of the paralegals what a retainer agreement actually was. On his 3rd day, Carla had him go to the bank and add himself as a co-signer on the firm's operating account so he could handle day-to-day expenses. Spencer signed every document placed in front of him without reading a single line. He didn't realize he was assuming joint personal liability for any obligations processed through that account. My mom came down one more time to see the new place. She sat across from me at the small IKEA kitchen table I'd put together myself, with a YouTube tutorial and a butter knife because the Allen wrench was missing, looked around at the still unpacked boxes and asked gently, "Miriam, are you sure you're not having some kind of breakdown? You're giving up Joel's house, his life's work, everything he built." I wanted so badly to open my laptop and show her the bank balance, to watch her eyes widen, but I couldn't. Not yet. Not until the papers were signed and the small-town gossip network had no chance to carry anything back to Carla. So I just hugged her and said, "Mom, trust me. It's really going to be okay." The closing was scheduled for a Tuesday in late June. The night before, I laid out Tessa's daycare outfit, packed a folder with the signed lease, recent bank statements showing $1,085,000 in clean funds, and set my alarm for 6:30. I climbed into bed, pulled up the covers, and, for the first time since March 6th, fell asleep in under 5 minutes. Axel Mendler's office was on the 3rd floor of a plain brick building on Pike Street in downtown Covington. Beige conference room, industrial carpet that smelled faintly of old coffee, a machine that produced something technically warm and technically brown, but only theoretically coffee. I arrived at 9:15 with LRA. We took the 2 chairs on the left side of the long table. Carla entered at 9:20 with Spencer and Axel in tow. She was dressed like she was accepting an award. Full makeup, gold earrings, cream silk blouse that probably cost more than my first year's rent in the new apartment. Spencer wore a brand new navy blazer. I noticed the price tag still dangling inside the collar against the back of his neck like a tiny white surrender flag. No one pointed it out. Certainly not me. The documents were straightforward. I, Miriam Frettel, hereby relinquish and transfer all claims to the estate assets of Joel Frettel, including but not limited to the law practice known as Frettel and Associates, the residential property, and all associated financial accounts, to Carla Frettel, who accepts said assets together with all associated liabilities and obligations. In exchange, Carla Frettel permanently withdraws her will contest and relinquishes any and all claims to custody of or visitation with Tessa Frettel. Miriam Frettel shall have sole legal and physical custody. LRA made one quiet statement for the record before anyone signed. My client is executing this agreement voluntarily and wishes to confirm that the opposing party has reviewed and accepted the estate inclusive of all previously disclosed liabilities. Axel nodded. Confirmed. Carla didn't even glance up. Her pen was already moving. I signed. Carla signed. Spencer sat there grinning like he'd just been named CEO of the universe. The entire proceeding took 8 minutes. The fastest 8 minutes of my entire life. And I once ran a half-mile in high school gym class just to avoid getting a B in phys ed. As I stood to leave, Carla couldn't resist one final jab. She looked across the table and said, "I hope this teaches you to finally stand on your own 2 feet, Miriam, without a Frettel man to lean on." Spencer nodded along in automatic agreement, probably without fully understanding the sentence. I picked up my bag, walked out, collected Tessa from daycare at 3:15 sharp, drove to our new apartment. I made her macaroni and cheese from the box, the kind shaped like dinosaurs because she swears dinosaur pasta tastes better than regular, and honestly, she might be right. We watched cartoons until 6:30. She fell asleep on the couch with a smear of orange cheese on her chin. I carried her to bed, kissed her forehead, then sat on the kitchen floor with my back against the cabinet and simply breathed. It was the most peaceful evening I'd had since the night Joel died. 3 weeks later, Carla Friedel walked into Friedel and Associates as its legal owner and began running what she believed was her new empire. I wasn't there to witness it, but in a town like Covington, you don't need to be. People talk. Gail still had friends in the office, and some details came straight from Carla herself during that final phone call. Here's what happened. Day 1. She finally opened the stack of unopened mail that had been piling up on Joel's desk, envelopes she'd walked past a dozen times without touching. The third one was from the Internal Revenue Service. Notice of unpaid payroll taxes. $47,000 principal plus accruing penalties and interest. Day 3. A polite but firm call from a Cincinnati attorney representing the plaintiff in the malpractice suit Joel had already agreed to settle for $180,000 before his death. Payment was past due. Day 5. The building landlord phoned about the office lease. 34 months remaining. To assume the lease in her name, she would need to sign a personal guarantee. Carla signed without hesitation. $4,200 a month seemed trivial when you believed the firm was printing $620,000 a year. Day 8. She attempted to access Joel's QuickBooks file without Gail. Chaos. 6 years of meticulously categorized entries that made perfect sense to Gail and 0 sense to anyone else. Carla hired a temporary accountant through a staffing agency. The woman sat down, clicked through files for 4 hours, then turned to Carla with the expression of someone who'd opened what they thought was a closet door and discovered a staircase descending into darkness. "Ma'am," she said carefully, "are you aware there are over $115,000 in outstanding vendor invoices here, some dating back 14 months? Day 10. Gail Horvath filed a formal wrongful termination claim for 6 years of service with no notice or severance. Estimated damages: around $20,000. Carla called Axel that night in full tea-kettle screech. He pulled up his files, read her own advisory letter aloud word for word, reminded her of the signed waiver. I recommended, strongly, a full forensic audit. You declined. I documented everything. Then she called me. Her name lit up my phone screen in the dark bedroom. I watched it ring 4 times. Then I turned the phone face down on the nightstand and went back to sleep. She hired a new lawyer, Betsy Polk, from a respected Cincinnati firm, someone with no prior connection to the mess. Fresh eyes. Sharp reputation. Carla told her the entire saga. Deceived, manipulated, tricked into accepting a worthless, debt-ridden estate by her cunning daughter-in-law. Betsy reviewed the settlement agreement, the signed waiver, Axel's detailed advisory letter, the estate filings LRA had prepared. Every single disclosed liability was listed clearly in black and white. Nothing hidden. Nothing invented. Miriam hadn't lied about a thing. She simply hadn't volunteered information about assets that were legally hers and legally outside the probate estate. Betsy delivered the verdict in language that left no room for wishful thinking. You were represented by competent counsel. You were explicitly advised to wait for a full audit. You refused. You signed a waiver acknowledging you were proceeding against that advice. The settlement was voluntary, mutual, and fully documented. There is no fraud here. There is no viable case. What you have is not a legal claim. What you have is a very, very expensive lesson. Carla tried to sell the house. The realtor ran the numbers at her own kitchen table. After paying off the first mortgage, the home equity line, closing costs, transfer taxes, and agent commission, Carla would owe approximately $11,000 just to walk away at closing. The house wasn't an asset. It was an exit fee. The IRS didn't care about her shock or her tears. Payroll tax penalties continued to accrue monthly. She began liquidating personal savings, money she'd built over 30 years from those 4 dry cleaning stores. She sold the Burlington location first, then the one in Erlanger. 2 stores gone in 2 months, and she still wasn't close to covering the firm's total obligations. Spencer, who had played managing partner for exactly 19 days before reality collapsed, suddenly remembered he had other places to be. He tried to remove his name as co-signer from the firm's operating account. The bank informed him that his signature had created joint and several liability for certain obligations processed through that account, including a vendor payment plan Carla had set up post-transfer. Spencer hired his own attorney, a 29-year-old man whose mother had been covering his cell phone bill for 6 years now, suing that same mother for coercion into signing documents he didn't understand. The case went nowhere. He'd signed as an adult with no evidence of duress. But the lawsuit itself was real. Spencer Fredel versus Carla Friedel, filed in Kenton County, complete with case number. Mother and son, the inseparable team who once stood in my kitchen measuring closets and dreaming of empire, now paying separate lawyers to argue against each other in open court. I honestly couldn't have written a more poetic ending if I'd stayed up all night trying. The very last time Carla called, I actually answered. She was crying. Not the theatrical sobs from Joel's funeral, but raw, messy, gasping tears you could hear through the speaker. She said she was losing everything. She said she hadn't known. She said she needed help. Any help. I listened without interrupting. When the words finally ran out, I spoke quietly. "Carla," I said, "you stood in my kitchen 11 days after I buried my husband and told me you wanted everything except my daughter. You said, word for word, that you didn't sign up for someone else's child. You wanted the house, the firm, every single dollar, and I gave you exactly what you asked for, every single piece of it." Then I hung up. I went back to the living room where Tessa was gluing macaroni noodles onto a piece of blue construction paper because she had decided to make a portrait of a horse, and the mane needed more noodles. That night, after she was asleep, I sat at my little IKEA table, the one I'd assembled myself with a butter knife and a YouTube video because the Allen wrench was nowhere to be found, and opened my laptop. I filled out the online application for the paralegal certification program at Gateway Community College. Tuition was $4,200 per semester. My account balance was $1,085,000. I could afford it, comfortably. On my nightstand, in a simple $6 black frame from the craft store down the street, sat Joel's letter. Every night before I turned off the light, I read the final line one more time. "Don't let her take what matters. She can have the rest." Thank you so much for staying with me through every word of this story. If it touched you even a little, if it made you angry or hopeful, or just nod in recognition, there's another one waiting on your screen right now. Honestly, it might be even better than this one. Click it and I'll see you there.